On the Mothers for Justice bus tour, you illustrated your belief about what the government was doing with the vaccine bioweapon by recounting a story of a specific example of blood testing that you personally observed involving a woman by the name of Rosanna Fiorazo. True?
No, it was not a Mothers for Justice bus tour.
Okay. Have you ever illustrated your belief about what the government was doing with vaccines by recounting a story of a specific example of blood testing you personally observed involving a woman by the name of Rosanna Fiorazo?
Could you slow down and repeat it, please?
Sure. Have you ever illustrated your belief about what the government was doing with the vaccine bioweapon by recounting a story of a specific example of blood testing that you personally observed involving a woman by the name of Rosanne Fiorazo?
Yes.
You told me at your deposition about this personal experience that you had with Rosanna Fiorazo. True?
True.
You and your husband know Rosanna Fiorazo's husband, David. True?
True.
In fact, you and your husband authored a chapter in a book written by Mr. David Fiorazo. True?
True.
The name of that book is Assault on the Image of God, Understanding and Responding to Attacks on the Bible, Human Life, and the Church. True?
True.
Rosanna was a Wisconsin woman who received the COVID vaccine in order to be permitted to fly to visit some family in Canada. True?
True.
You recounted to me at your deposition that Rosanna was experiencing some memory problems, so her husband requested that you accompany her to have her blood tested at a place that does blood reading. True?
True.
You personally accompanied Rosanna to this place that did blood reading and which was not a hospital. True?
True.
Okay. You sat with Rosanna while the technician who did the blood reading put the results up on a TV screen for you and Rosanna to see as she read the blood. True?
True.
You told me at your deposition what you saw on the screen at that blood reading. True?
True.
You told me that you saw nanotechnology in Rosanna's blood, things that looked like little spaceships with antennae in the blood. True?
The shapes of them looked like that. They weren't spaceships.
You told me that you also saw graphene and pieces of metal in her blood on that TV screen. True?
True.
Graphene is in fact a metal. True?
True.
The lady who performed this blood reading said that this was graphene in the blood that you were seeing on that screen. True?
True.
You believe that this nanotechnology and this graphene that you were seeing in Rosanna's blood was placed there as part of the COVID vaccine bioweapon that she had received. True?
True.
You told me at your deposition that you were concerned enough by what you had seen at this blood reading place to have your own blood tested, even though you had never received the vaccine. True?
True.
You got the results of this blood testing back on your own blood, and you learned that you did not have any nanotechnology in your blood, but you did have some evidence of graphene in the blood. True?
Correct.
You understood that you supposedly had graphene in your blood as a result of what you described as a phenomenon called shedding. True?
True.
You described the term shedding as describing a phenomenon whereby anyone who received the COVID vaccine for a number of days after receiving the vaccine could shed graphene into the blood of anyone who happened to be standing near that person, for example, through sweat. True?
Objection, Your Honor. At this point, how long this has gone on, I also believe this is subject to prior rulings.
Go ahead and answer about the question about the sweat and getting it from others.
I'm not sure if that's how it was stated in my depositions. That sounds much more different than what I
Okay.
described.
If you could reference page 245 of your transcript.
Okay.
Starting at page 1, the question was posed. So shedding, what do you mean by shedding? And your answer was as follows. When people were standing next to each other, I don't know the technological stuff, But if you were within somebody within so many days of them getting the vaccination, the body was, through their sweat, was able to pass some of this. Like I said, I don't know the exact description. CHD has a description of it. Did I read that correctly?
That's what's written here, yes. That's what's written here.
I'm sorry?
That is what's written in the deposition.
Thank you. You can close the transcript. I don't have any further questions there. CHD is the Children's Health Defense website?
Correct.
Okay. You believe that you must have been standing in close proximity to someone who had received the vaccine at some point, such that some graphene was shed from that person's blood to your own?
As I said in my thing, I don't know how it works. I don't know how the graphene, but it's through the,
You told me at your deposition that there were certain ways to detox, i.e. to get the graphene out of your blood. True?
true.
You mentioned to me at your deposition that you can detox from the graphene shed by those who had received the vaccine by drinking dandelion root tea or by taking baths using certain items. True?
Just repeat that again.
Yes. You mentioned to me at your deposition that you can detox from the graphene shed by those who had received the vaccine by drinking dandelion root tea or by taking baths using certain items. True?
True.
Okay. At your deposition, I asked if you could kindly identify for me the name and location of the place where you went to have your blood tested. And you told me in your deposition that you could identify the place, but you would not do so. True?
I wouldn't because you were badgering me.
Okay.
Not me.
Prior to October of 2021, you were the one who was most involved with providing for Grace's needs on a day-to-day basis. Would that be a fair statement?
Say that again.
Prior to October of 2021, you would have been the one most involved in providing for Grace's needs on a day-to-day basis. True?
Correct.
Okay. That was because your husband had a job outside of the home, but you were able to homeschool Grace and spent the most time with her on a day-to-day basis. True?
True. She was my student.
Okay. That's all I have for you, ma'am. Thank you.
Attorney Guzzi, cross-examination.
Thank you, Judge. Are you able to hear me okay?
I am.
All right. You testified in your, you testified earlier that Dr. Schara didn't inform you as to Grace being in the ICU.
That he did not inform me?
Did not inform you.
Correct. Correct.
You also testified that Grace never changed rooms while she was in St. Elizabeth, correct?
Correct.
So your husband, Scott, was in that same room from October 7th through the 10th, true?
Correct.
And your daughter, Jessica, was in that room several times during Grace's hospitalization.
Correct.
Certainly, they told you that she was in the ICU.
No. No.
They never told you that.
No.
You also testified that you're qualified in CPR.
I take CPR to keep myself.
I'm sorry, were you finished?
You just asked me if I take CPR. Correct.
Asked if you testified that you're qualified in CPR.
I have been, yes, meaning I take the classes.
So you know the purpose of CPR.
Correct.
And you know how it works, right?
If I would come upon somebody, yes, I would know.
You know that you have to do chest compressions, right?
Correct.
And that you'd be working on the patient to try to revive them.
Correct.
You understood, right?
Correct.
So when you had your conversation with Dr. Schara, both on October 12th and October 13th, I think you told us that Dr. Schara was asking you if there was a scenario in which Grace experienced cardiac arrest, would you want them to keep working on her? You recall that?
He didn't say cardiac arrest.
He did say heart stops, though, didn't he?
He said if her heart stopped and we couldn't get it going again, would you want us to keep working on her?
So he may not have said cardiac arrest, but he did say heart stops, right?
Yes,
And with your qualifications in CPR, you know that those are the same thing, don't you?
yes,
When he was, you knew exactly what he was talking about, and he was talking about CPR.
it was an odd situation. He just talked to us about putting her on, getting her food and stuff. So it was
Being non-responsive.
correct. What'd you say?
Ruled. It was non-responsive, they heard it, but keep going.
Can you knew that, right?
I didn't think of it in that way at that time, at that moment. We were just talking about Grace getting on a feeding tube and everything.
But you were thinking in your mind something along the lines of, if she's already gone, it's futile. That's what you were thinking, right?
And yes,
Did you tell Dr. Shokar that?
no,
At some point during either the conversation of the 12th or the 13th, you and Dr. Shokar, Mr. Schara and Dr. Shokar discussed a tracheotomy.
we did not discuss a tracheotomy.
Okay, in the context of the conversation, Dr. Shokar brought it up.
He mentioned those who get a ventilator most of the time get a trach.
Do you have an understanding of what a tracheotomy is?
Yes, I'm actually advocating for a lady that has a trach right now.
And so you know that a trach, that's an incision directly into the windpipe and the tube goes down, right?
Correct.
You understand it's a surgical procedure.
Correct.
You understand that it's done under general anesthesia, right?
Not always,
Local anesthesia.
not in an emergency.
Sure, that would be called a slash trach, right?
I believe so.
That's not what we're talking about in this case. That's not.
He just mentioned the trach and the way that he said, most people that get a ventilator get a trach. That's all he said, was not a discussion.
And you also knew that that procedure leaves a permanent scar.
Yes, just holding her. And then two nurses came in, one to mainly gather her belongings, and then another one came in just to clean up Grace. And then the next thing I knew, there was another nurse that came in. I don't remember if it was the same nurse that helped put the belongings in the cart or not, but it was the body bag, and they tied it shut. I just wanted to see her one more time. It just
Okay.
stop.
Did you ask?
I did ask. I said, "Can you just let me have one more, look at her one more time?"
What happened?
And the nurse said no. She could not open it back up.
Is there an undertaker that came?
Yes, there was an undertaker that came.
How much time did the undertaker spend there with you?
He was there at least an hour with us.
From when you got in the room until when you went home later that night, about how much time passed?
It was several hours. We had probably gotten there at the hospital by 8 o'clock, and we didn't get home till after, I think it was 12:30.
So all told, you're in that room with your dead daughter in a body bag for how long?
At least 4 hours, I would say.
Okay, so long time,
Correct,
too long.
correct. Especially in the place that just took your daughter's life. I mean, it just was not a place you want to spend with your daughter.
All right, well, then, Dr. Shokar's interaction with you, I want to ask you about that. What did Dr. Shokar do when he came in the room to see you after she died?
We didn't see Dr. Shokar.
Did Dr. You're telling me you didn't see him at all?
Correct. Did not see him.
Did he have anything to say to you? What did Dr. Shokar have to say to you after she died?
Nothing was said to us.
What kind of words of condolences did Dr. Shokar have for you after your daughter died?
There was nothing. No one actually said anything to us.
Holly McGinnis, Nurse McGinnis?
She didn't say anything.
Let me ask the question, okay? What did Holly McGinnis say to you after your daughter died?
Nothing.
What words of condolences did Nurse Holly McGinnis have to offer you there in the room that you were in for 4 hours after your daughter died?
Nothing. Or to be seen.
Do you know where they were? When I say they, Dr. Shok, do you know where Dr. Shokar was?
I learned that they were no longer at the hospital.
They didn't come back to offer any condolences?
No. They could have been in the hospital, but they were nowhere on the floor by us at all. That's what I had learned.
Did any other doctor or nurse come in to offer you any condolences?
No, nothing was. No one came in. No one said anything to us.
You were escorted out of the hospital then before you went home?
Yes, we were.
By a nurse?
She was a nurse.
She wearing a uniform?
So they all had their PPE on. So, but I believe she was a nurse, or maybe some other level. But I believe she was a nurse.
Well, there were no visitors allowed in the hospital at this time, so it was either hospital staff or patient. Right?
Correct. Yep, correct. I believe she was a nurse because she was the same one that came in and helped put the items on the cart that were in Grace's room, because Grace had been given a lot of cool gifts. So she had crafts to do while she was in the hospital. She loved to color, and she had an Elvis coloring book somebody gave her, and she had a couple of the felt pictures. One was a huge butterfly, and she had balloons and some flowers, and so she had been showered with gifts, and so the nurse came in to put those on a cart, and this was the same person then that took us down.
Do you remember anything about that as you walked out with this nurse?
I do. I remember she stopped at a desk on the way out and gave him a manila envelope, and then she escorted us the rest of the way down with the undertaker down to the lower level first to have the undertaker put Grace's body in the hearse, and then she continued to take us up out the emergency room exit.
Did she say anything to you that hit you at the time?
Was. Overruled.
As she helped us outside the emergency room doors, and we were loading up the items that were on the cart. She leaned down by me and she said to me, she said, "Mrs. Schara, several other nurses don't believe Grace should have died tonight." And when she said that, I knew something happened, because how could Grace have been alive that morning and then done by that evening?
want to interject. I didn't know what the answer was going to be. But I'm going to explain to the jurors. So there is an objection on hearsay. Hearsay is a complicated rule, but you start with the premise of in a court, you don't allow in a statement that was made by somebody outside of court, by a different person in court. But there are some exceptions and exemptions to that rule. And when that objection was made, I overruled it because I thought to myself, that statement, I'm going to allow the impact that it had on Ms. Schara. And that's one of the exceptions, that it can be offered to show the impact on whoever heard it. And after listening to the answer, and I think the answer is something to the effect of me and other nurses did not think that Grace should have died. I want the jurors to not take that as a true statement, or it's the truth of the statement, because that would be hearsay. But take it to the sense of whatever impact that might have on Ms. Schara. And don't believe that that statement is true or untrue. It's not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. Any issues with that, Mr. Crimponian? Were you the one who objected?
I was.
No objected, Your Honor.
Okay, so I don't know if you want to, any issues with that, or you want to wait till the next sidebar or the next opportunity?
No, at this time, Your Honor, that's fine. We can address it afterwards.
Anything else, Attorney Boylan, on that issue?
I believe it is a admission of a party opponent or the representative of a party opponent, so it isn't hearsay to begin with, and also it's a present sense impression, so we could deal with that at the sidebar, but I'm happy with Your Honor's explanation to the jury. The truth or untruthfulness of that is not what is important at this time.
Yeah, not only is it not important, I don't want them at any stage to take that as the truth of that statement. I'm okay with you hearing it and whatever impact that has, but it's not being offered. It shouldn't be heard to be for the truth of the matter. I will say that again to you at the end of the trial, but there are times, because this trial is so long, that when I hear an objection, I have no idea what the answer was going to be. Nobody's ever brought that to my attention. So I ruled it the way I thought was the right answer, and then after I heard the answer, I thought, well, I'm only partially correct. I just thought I'd correct it for you guys right away. While I'm talking, we're going to get something out of the air because there's been like 3 or 4 objections on leading. And so it's improper for a party to ask leading questions of their own witness. A leading question is something where you're kind of steering them or leading them to a certain answer. I usually allow it because of a couple of things. Number one, it just saves time. It gets the attorney to get a witness who may be emotional or having a hard time. You just focus in on something. And number two, you guys are all really smart, and you're able to see if the attorney is leading them into an answer that the attorney is trying to get them to say. And if that's the case, you'd say, well, I'm not going to give a lot of merit to the answer because it's like leading. He's trying to force her to say something. So for the most part, throughout the rest of the trial, just so everybody knows, I'm probably going to overrule those unless I think it's really unfair, and that'll happen both ways because I think this jury is smart enough to understand it, but you can still make your objections on it. Okay, Mr. Boylan.
And Judge, I want to be sure I understand you're ruling correctly on the hearsay in terms of it, the admission of a party opponent, but the larger principle that you are.
Well, I'm not sure this is a party opponent. I didn't want to argue with you.
We'll do that. We'll do that.
Person hasn't been identified.
Yeah, yes, I understand, Judge. So that will be later, but the court's admonition to the jury about truthfulness is not that it is untrue. It is not that it is true. It is neither one. The jury cannot take that for its truthfulness or untruthfulness. Is that what I'm understanding?
You got your hand up?
Yeah, this is a completely inappropriate,
Yes.
in my opinion, appropriate conversation to be having in front of the jury.
I agree. So right now, what I'm telling the jury, and I tried to do it right off the bat, but I'm just going to repeat it. That comment about me and other nurses did not think that Grace should have died. That should be given no truth or untruth. As far as I know, I have no idea who said it. And essentially it's hearsay. But I'm going to allow it in to let you consider
it.
It's not somebody admitting anything, because I have no idea who that someone is. And it hasn't been established. And if that changes throughout the trial, then we'll do it that way. And I don't want there to be a suggestion that, because I think that's just unfair.
Fair enough, thank you.
Can I interject something?
No, I'll have the next question for you, which is, I want you to tell us about life after Grace's death.
Somebody have to go to the bathroom? Okay, just don't, if you want to bring it over, keep going, Mr. Boylan.
So the same question is there. I would like to ask you about, tell us about life after Grace's death.
I guess the best way to describe life without Grace is, if you can imagine not having one of your children around. The noise in the house or the activities that you would go and do with them are no longer. You go out to eat and you have one less person to sit at the table with you. You realize that your weekends are empty because the one that you lived your life for is no longer there. Life goes on for most everybody else, but your life kind of stops and yours is at a standstill. And yet you trust that there is a reason for the things that you're going through, but at the same time, you find that there's a true emptiness in your life because of the joy that, in our case, that Grace brought to us, and the excitement, the holidays, the events that we would take part in, watching her perform or act and be in recitals or play her violin. They're no longer part of our life, and so it's impacted our life tremendously. It's very, very empty. Life is very empty. But we hope unto God's promise that we'll get to see her again, because she knew her Lord and Savior.
Mrs. Schara, those are all the questions that I have for you.
Okay. So cross-examination, are you going first, Mr. Franco, yet?
I would, Your Honor. Before I begin my cross-examination, might I request a sidebar with Your Honor? Thank you.
All right, so we're going to just start the cross-examination, but one of you handed me a note that said, please tell the judge to turn on his microphone. So I try to keep it away when I'm not speaking, but I'll remember that when I'm speaking to do that. And so I hate to have to repeat this again, but I'm going to. Because one of you didn't hear it, and I told the attorneys that I was going to do this. During the direct examination of this witness, there was a question asked of her about what some unidentified person allegedly told her as she was exiting the hospital. My understanding is that person has never been identified. They don't know who it is. And that causes concerns on credibility because the other side can't cross-examine that person. So the objection was hearsay. I overruled the objection. And then when I listened to the answer, I figured I need to tell the jurors how to take that statement. So the admission of the statement about this individual told me that this individual and other nurses did not think that Grace should have died, or something to that effect, cannot be considered by you for the truth of that statement or the fact that it was ever made by anyone. What I'm allowing you to consider it for is if you believe, Ms. Schara, that that statement was made to her, then the only impact of it is what impact would that have on a mom of Grace? The effect on the listener, which is an exception to the hearsay rules. So I don't want you to think that that statement's true or untrue and not put any truth into it and not consider it really for any other reason than the impact on Ms. Schara. I think I addressed in the second issue during our sidebar, but we'll make a record of that at the next time the jury breaks. Okay. Are you going to do cross-examination first, Mr. Franco?
Yeah. Yes, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mrs. Schara. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Okay, thank you. If at any time you cannot hear me, please let me know, okay? Mrs. Schara, you have never reviewed Grace's medical records, true?
true,
Okay. You've never attended nursing school or medical school, true?
true.
It would be fair to state that you do not have any medical training?
What of medical training are you referring to?
Okay. Formal medical training or medical education in a medical school? Okay. You have no certifications in any medical field?
CPR, if that qualifies?
Additional certifications in the medical field? Employed in the home?
Correct,
You have not been employed outside the home since 1987, shortly after you became married to Mr. Schara, true?
it's around the date. I believe that's about around that time. I believe that's about around that time.
Sure. You do not have any certifications in the field of pharmacology, would that be correct?
No,
You have never practiced as a pharmacist or worked in a pharmacy, true?
that's true.
You have never personally administered medications, including Precedex, lorazepam, or morphine to another person, true?
Correct,
Okay, thank you. You've never been trained to administer medications like Precedex, lorazepam, and morphine to another person, true? Okay. As I understand your testimony, ma'am, for the first 19 years of her life, Grace received regular medical care through St. Elizabeth Hospital, true?
correct,
Okay. And I think you testified that her primary care provider was a doctor by the name of Mary Nordstrom.
yes,
And Dr. Nordstrom is associated with St. Elizabeth Hospital.
true,
You got along well with Dr. Nordstrom,
very well,
and you believe that Dr. Nordstrom had the best interests of your daughter in mind at all times.
yes, true,
Okay. And you were happy with the care provided by Grace or to Grace by St. Elizabeth and Dr. Nordstrom up through October of 2021, true?
true.
Okay. We'll talk a little bit about October of 2021. I understand that Grace was admitted to St. Elizabeth Hospital on or about the early morning hours of October 7th. True?
Could you repeat that?
Sure, I understand Grace was admitted to the hospital, St. Elizabeth, during the early morning hours or late evening of October 6th.
Yes, that's
Okay.
true.
And as I understand it, you and your husband Scott made the decision to admit Grace to the hospital?
Yes,
Okay. Grace had gone with you and your husband to a public concert in Oshkosh on September 25th of 2021, true?
yes,
And the Delta variant of the COVID-19 virus was going around at that time, true?
I don't know.
Okay. On or about September 28th of 2021, Grace began to show some symptoms of illness, true?
Could you repeat that?
On or about September 28th of 2021, Grace began to show some symptoms of illness?
Not illness, just allergies.
Okay. You did not contact any healthcare providers for Grace at any time between September 28th and October 6th, true?
Repeat that.
Sure. You did not contact any healthcare providers for Grace at any time between September 28th and October 6th, true?
I believe that's true.
Okay. Your husband did his own independent research into how to prepare for COVID prior to October of 2021, true?
No,
Okay. Do you recall giving a deposition, ma'am, on May 14th of 2024?
I'm not quite sure on the date, but I did give a deposition, yes.
Did you understand that you were under oath when you gave that deposition?
Yes,
Okay, thank you. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
May I ask to see what's being shown? Oh, if it's going to be a particular page or the entire deposition?
Feel free to open that. Feel free to reference that if we need to as we go along. If you could open that package, please, and if we could refer to page 66. Let me know when you arrive at page 66.
I'm there.
Ma'am,
Judge, before the next question is asked, I may interpose an objection about impeachment at this point in time.
The objection.
He hasn't identified any inconsistent statement she's made before that he wants to ask her about. I don't know what it is, that there's anything that she's testified to previously to have her looking back at a deposition transcript at this point.
I take it that's what you're going to do right now?
yes, the pending question is your husband did his own independent research.
Let me just so I'm going to overrule the objection. Keep going.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am, please reference, I'm going to start reading on line 6 on page 66, okay? There's a question that I asked you at your deposition, and it goes as follows. Are you familiar with the Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance? Your answer was correct. Did I read that correctly?
Page 66, I'm sorry, I don't see where you're at.
That is correct on line 6, ma'am.
Okay, I see what it's referenced now. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. My question to you at that time in your deposition was, are you familiar with the Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance? Your answer was correct.
Correct.
Okay. I asked you, how are you familiar with them? And your answer was as follows. It was just something that we had been made aware of during COVID, and that there was recommendations that they were giving to help people get through COVID so that you did not. And then the question I followed up with, you said you had become aware. Who made you aware of them, or how did you become aware of them? Did I read that correctly?
Correct.
Your answer to that question was, I think we just did a lot of research. My question following that was, did you do any research? Your response was, no, my husband had looked into how to prepare for COVID if people got sick. Did I read that correctly?
Correct, that's,
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
your question before stated it differently.
Well, please feel free to keep that transcript for reference as we go along. We may reference it again. Through this research, I understand your husband became aware of a group known as the Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance. True?
Correct.
And you treated Grace at home with the frontline doctors?
Oh, yeah, if there's an objection, let's just slow down.
Is my microphone here? This is my objection because his questions to her before were nothing about this Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance.
But we're not gonna argue in front of the jury, so you state your objection.
My objection is that he has not presented her with testimony that's contradictory to anything she said today in court.
Immediately prior to it was, when did your husband do the research, like before this October of 2021? And her answer was no. And it seems like the transcript on page 66 was just read, that it sounds like she and/or Mr. Schara or Mr. Schara alone had done research about COVID prior to October of 2021. Is that what you were getting at, Mr. Frankowiak?
That is correct, Your Honor.
That's how I understood the impeachment, and I think that was proper impeachment.
The part about the Frontline Critical COVID Care Alliance.
I
So
think that's going to be a second issue that he's getting to. So the objection's overruled. Go ahead.
Ma'am, you treated Grace at home with the Frontline Doctors treatment protocols until October 6th of 2021 when your husband took her to urgent care, true?
True.
Okay. The Frontline Doctors recommended going to the hospital if an individual's oxygen saturation fell below 94%, true?
Say that again, please.
The Frontline Doctors recommended going to the hospital if an individual's oxygen saturation fell below 94%, true?
I believe that is one of their recommendations.
6th of 2021, Grace's oxygen saturations were falling in the range of 87 to 91%, true?
True.
You were concerned about Grace's oxygen saturations on October 6th, true? True. You and your husband first took Grace to urgent care on October 6th, true?
No,
Okay. You did not take Grace?
that wasn't first.
Okay. You and your husband took Grace to urgent care on October 6th?
But that wasn't first. First, we called Dr. Mary Nordstrom's office.
Ma'am, the question is just to confirm whether you took.
But you had asked what I first did was take her to urgent care, and that is not what we first did.
Ma'am, you've also testified that your husband accompanied Grace into the office at urgent care while you stayed in the car, true?
Could you repeat that, please?
You also testified that your husband accompanied Grace into the office at urgent care and you stayed in the car, true?
True.
You did so because you were feeling ill, having recently tested positive for COVID-19 yourself, true?
True.
You were in fact ill with COVID symptoms for the entire time that Grace was in the hospital in October of 2021, true?
No, they weren't all COVID symptoms. Like I said, they were mainly allergy symptoms.
Okay. Ma'am, if you could look at your deposition transcript at page 59, please. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
On page 59 of your deposition transcript, starting at line 2, do you see that? There's a question, correct?
Correct.
The question is, okay, were you still experiencing the same symptoms that you had on October 6th, on October 13th? Answer, yes, I was quite sick yet. Did I read that correctly? The next question is as follows. Okay, so would it be fair to state that the entire time that Grace was in the hospital in St. Elizabeth, you were fairly sick with COVID? Your answer was correct. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did at that
Thank-
time. At that time, what
Thank you,
people
ma'am.
had said was what I was referring to, but I just really had the regular symptoms, like allergy symptoms. It wasn't like what people were saying COVID was.
Thank you, ma'am. You testified, when you gave your deposition, you testified under oath and you understood you were under oath, true?
True,
And you understand you are under oath today as well, true?
true, but what I had said there is
Urgent
different
care.
than what I've learned now, so.
Ma'am, in urgent care, it was recommended that Grace go to the emergency department to get a chest x-ray, true?
What line are you on?
Reading a line, that's just a
Oh, I
question.
thought you just had asked me to read something out of the transcripts.
I'll pose the question again. In urgent care, it was recommended that Grace go to the emergency department to get a chest x-ray, true?
That's what I thought it was, the chest x-ray.
Okay. Grace and your husband Scott went by ambulance from urgent care to the emergency department and you then followed in your car, true?
Could you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
Yes, Grace and your husband Scott went by ambulance from urgent care to the emergency department and you followed in your car,
Correct.
okay? You again stayed in your car while Grace was in the emergency department at St. Elizabeth, but you were in contact with your husband by telephone, true?
Correct.
You and your husband made the joint decision to admit Grace to the hospital from the ER, true?
Correct.
You then drove home from the ER on October 6th and your husband stayed with Grace in the hospital, true?
Correct.
You understood on that date, October 6th, that you would not be able to stay with Grace in the hospital because you were still ill with COVID symptoms, true?
Say that one more time, please.
You believe that you would not be able to stay with Grace in the hospital as of October 6th because you were still ill with COVID symptoms, true?
That's what I said in the
Okay.
transcript.
You understood as of that date, October 6th, when you took Grace to the ER, that the hospital would not allow you in because you were too ill, true?
I was coughing. I had, like I said, incontinence, so I would imagine that they would have said that I couldn't enter.
Okay. You understood that as of October 6th, if you were symptomatic with COVID, a medical facility like St. Elizabeth Hospital would not allow you or be able to allow you onto the facility's grounds, true?
Please. Repeat that, please.
Yes. You understood as of October 6, 2021, that if you were symptomatic with COVID, a medical facility like St. Elizabeth Hospital would not be able to let you onto the premises, true? Okay. In fact, as of October 6th of 2021, you knew without being told that anyone who was expressing outward signs of COVID symptoms would not be permitted into the hospital, true?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Are you not hearing him?
Yeah,
Because it's gonna
It's kind
take,
of like an echo. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to adjust it here. I feel like there's an echo.
it's not your microphone, but I'm able to hear you.
You can
I can hear you fine, so,
Okay.
yeah, so keep going.
Okay. In fact, as of October 6th of 2021, you knew without being told that anyone who was expressing outward signs of COVID symptoms would not be permitted into the hospital, true?
True.
Okay. Because you were ill with symptoms of COVID at all times between October 6th and October 13th of 2021, you were never personally present in the hospital at any time prior to October 13th, true?
True.
I want to talk a little bit about the events of October 10th of 2021.
Is this a good time to stop and take a break? we're at that break time for the.
This is a good time to do that.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
So at this time, members of the jury, we're gonna give you an afternoon break. You're probably gonna get another one in a little while too. Just a reminder not to discuss this case with anyone, including each other. Take your notebooks with you back to the jury room. And then just bring them back when you come in, and it'll be, you know, that 15-minute time frame. And when you get back to the jury room, let the bailiffs know how much time you need, and then they're going to let me know right away. And hopefully 15 minutes will be enough time. But if you need more, just let us know so I can let the parties know. Jurors are excused. Make sure you step down. All right, you may be seated. I know we're going to get to that sidebar, which might take a few minutes, so I want to do a couple things first. The deposition transcript, has that been marked as an exhibit? And should it be?
I'm sorry?
The deposition transcript that she's been referencing, don't we usually mark those as an exhibit or not?
I would say no, Joe. Judge, it's only used for purposes of impeachment, and on that, I would later ask to be heard, but not an exhibit, I would say.
And you don't want it as an exhibit either?
No, I would mark it as an exhibit, Your Honor.
Okay, so what's the next number that have you already identified it as an exhibit?
I have to look at my most recent, I think the one that was recently filed, it may not be on that one or not, whatever the most.
Are you in the 200s or the 300s? Okay, so has it been marked or not? I don't want to waste a lot of time on it, but I think we should get a sticker on it.
What was the last number? It was like 400 something? 413 was the last number.
Okay, so we'll mark that as exhibit 414.
Not correct?
my thing, Mr. Frankowiak. I get bothered when people all of a sudden are saying motion for mistrial, and I go, well, why didn't you bring it to my attention then before it happened right here in the middle of trial? I had no idea what any of you were talking about.
But Your Honor, and it was
Okay.
not known that they were going to bring it up and to try to put it in, which was the purpose of my
That's not, you made a lot of motions in limiting on stuff that they may or may not have brought up
Mhm.
that would be beneficial to your case. Why didn't you do that in this situation?
For the same reason, Your Honor, because I did not know until she
Let me just
identified
stop
the
you for a
stand.
second. There's the same reason you brought up a lot of motions in limiting. I decided a lot of motions on things that the plaintiff may or may
Correct.
not do that you were aware of. So
Correct.
you were aware of this testimony. You knew they might try to get it in. Why would you wait until the middle of direct examination to object? Or why not make me aware of it a month ago or 2 weeks ago or this morning?
No, you're right, Honor. It was not a motion in limine that was brought. There were other, I believe, issues that were dealt with, but
I
not.
think I had 108 motions in limiting. So I'm trying to figure out why you wouldn't have done that. It seems like you're putting me in a tough spot. Like, you knew about it. You didn't do anything about it. It gets brought up in the middle of trial. I decided after it comes in, I go, Jesus, this is different than what I thought. So then I try to correct it in front of the jury, and then you're making a motion for mistrial. I'm saying, well, why didn't you do your job and let me know ahead of time?
Knowledge that you have given an instruction to the jury, a curative instruction, and that is acknowledged.
Understood. I'm trying to dig into why you didn't do that, and then what else haven't you done that's going to be brought up in the middle of this?
Nothing at all, Your Honor. That would be the only statement that was brought up here, Your Honor.
Okay, so there's no other motions in limiting that you think should have been made that haven't been made, that you're waiting for them to bring it up in the middle of trial?
Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Mr. Guzzi, you raised your hand. Okay, Mr. Fleiter, I think you raised your hand.
Your Honor, I withdraw.
Okay, so anybody, Mr. Boylan, it's your witness, so I'm going to deny the motion for mistrial. Not exactly sure what to make out of all of it. It seems like an odd thing that we wouldn't have, out of all the things we talked about in this case, like, why wouldn't we have talked about that one? And if I could go back, 3 weeks ago when we were sitting here for days deciding that, I probably wouldn't have let it in. But I think you didn't make that motion, and it came in up at the time of trial, and I've tried to correct it to whatever extent I did. So anything else, Mr. Boylan?
Yes, Judge, it did come up in the depositions. She did not know the name of the person in the depositions. It's not as if something you can put back in the toothpaste tube. Once we knew her name, we would have known her name. She didn't know the name. I do want to say 90801, sub 4, sub B, this is the party opponent issue. I understand Your Honor's ruling, but to make a record, subsection 4, this is not hearsay if it is a statement by the party's agent or servant concerning a matter within the scope of the agent or servant's agency or employment during the existence of the relationship. This is why I laid the foundation with her that this individual was the same person who came into the room and placed some items around. It was the same person who walked her downstairs. She was wearing the hospital nursing gear, and there were no visitors allowed in the hospital, and therefore it had to have been an agent or servant of the defendant, of a party. And
Stop you for a second. So you're talking
90801, sub 4, sub B, number 4. And the hospital's position is that the hospital itself is the only proper party, not the individual staff, not the individual nurses with respect to the negligence. So that person, whether we know the person's name or not, was an agent or servant concerning the matter within the scope of that agent or servant's employment, and therefore is statement of a party opponent. I didn't attempt to try to sneak anything in. I laid the foundation with that being an agent or servant.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that that's necessarily true based on what Ms. Schara testified to. What she said is the person was wearing PPE gear. She didn't really know. She assumed it was somebody associated with the hospital, but it could have been somebody with the pastor, the undertaker, or a volunteer. Right? That was her testimony?
I don't think she said it could have been someone else. She said it was somebody who escorted her out of the hospital, and it was somebody who had been in the room before doing some things with arranging the room.
I don't remember that. But But in any event,
I respect your ruling, and the point I did not understand was, and Your Honor did later say to the jury, you're not to take it for the truth or the untruth, one way or the other, and I'm happy with that.
okay. All right, good. Anything else before we take a break from the plaintiff?
No, Judge.
Yeah. And again, when I ask these questions, it's not to rush anybody, it's just to get an idea.
Depending how quickly we go, it could be maybe 20 minutes. And I mean, if I have to keep repeating, it may take a little longer, but 20 minutes perhaps.
What do you have?
10 minutes.
Back to redirect after a half hour or so,
Yes,
and then you get your second witness ready to go if we don't get to the break.
we do. May I ask Mr. Frankowiak something about where his testimony may go so that I,
Yeah, you guys can do that at the break, but let's start up at 2:15, which will give each of you like 12 or 13 minutes. Is that good?
Great.
Sure.
Thank you.
On the court clock here.
Okay, so that's fine.
Okay, good. We'll see everybody then. This is the parties are, or the attorneys are here. We're missing some of your co-counsel, Attorney Boylan and Mr. Schara, but jury's coming back down. We're going to start in a couple minutes. What do you want to say?
Judge, so I did touch base with Mr. Frankowiak during the break about where his testimony or where his questioning might next go, because I did have a concern about there was a transcript, and I believe it's up at the witness stand right now because it was an exhibit at Mrs. Schara's deposition. There was a transcript that Mr. Frankowiak's own office prepared. It's not a certified court reporter's transcript. It's the only exhibit to her deposition. This exhibit, I believe it's the only, but it's exhibit number 1. And he prepared that transcript of a podcast that she was on. Mr. Frankowiak, and correct me if I'm wrong, he said he is not going to attempt to introduce that transcript. It is not a certified court reporter's transcript. And he also is not going to play this podcast. I don't think it's relevant at all. And I think I'm free to object to that when it comes up as relevant. I don't know if the
Stipulation of that?
I'm sorry?
Stipulation?
Yes, I am not going to introduce a transcript, nor am I going to play the podcast. I'm going to ask questions that I asked at the deposition based upon testimony she gave. That's it.
And this is where I think he can only ask her about that if she gives inconsistent testimony today as impeachment, to ask her about her prior deposition testimony. It has to be inconsistent, not simply variant.
I'm not understanding exactly what he's saying. I'm just asking questions based upon testimony she gave in a sworn deposition. I'm not asking any other questions. Everything is based just on the deposition testimony she gave, so.
I will approve the stipulation. If it's getting into an issue, just ask and we'll have a sidebar. I appreciate you putting me on notice of it. Right, so we'll just talk about it. If you think it's getting anything close, just let me know.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You had your hand up, Mr. Guzzi?
So, just quick, I mean, I think the other part of this deposition transcript issue, and it's for knowledge moving forward. I mean, the transcript, I believe, can also just be used to refresh the witness's recollection. It does not have to be used for impeachment. So you can ask him if this was your deposition testimony at the time. And then if you choose to show up that it's inconsistent, then you can use the original transcript. That's my understanding. I don't think it has to be just for impeachment purposes.
My understanding is in order to refresh the recollection, though, the witness would first say they don't remember what they would have testified to. And that, yes, looking at the transcript would be helpful in refreshing the recollection. And you don't get the refresh absent those two things, right?
Agreed.
So that's one approach. And then the second approach, I think, is what Attorney Frankowiak did. So there's a couple of different methods that you guys can use to get there, but some of it will be on how helpful the witness is too, and what they're doing. So, but that approach is fine as long as you lay the foundation with those two initial questions. We're ready for the jurors. Schara, if you want to come back up to the witness stand. Okay, everyone may be seated. Welcome back, members of the jury. Two of the jurors have been sitting next together since jury selection. I don't know what the two of you will do, but it's good. And just to remind you, so you know, I cut off Attorney Frankowiak in the middle of his cross-examination, so that's where we're going to pick it up. When he's done, Attorney Guzzi will have a chance to cross-examine. And then there'll be an opportunity to redirect by the plaintiffs, and then we'll move into, hopefully, to the second witness. So back to you, Attorney Frankowiak.
Ma'am, could you once again hear me just to make sure my microphone's working?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. When we left off, we were about to talk a little bit about the events of October 10th of 2021. You were periodically in contact with your husband by telephone between October 6th and October 9th, 2021, true?
True.
You believe that Grace was doing well based upon your conversations with your husband between October 6th and October 9th, true?
True.
On the morning of October 10th, 2021, I understand you received a telephone call from your husband at somewhere in the vicinity of 7 or 8 o'clock a.m., true?
True.
Your husband informed you at that time that he was being required to leave the hospital, true?
True.
Your husband asked you in that telephone call if you felt well enough to come to the hospital to take his place at Grace's bedside, true?
Correct.
You informed your husband during that telephone call that you were not feeling well enough to do so, true?
True.
Okay. You discussed with your husband over the telephone that morning the potential of getting your daughter Jessica to the hospital to take your husband's place at Grace's bedside, true?
Correct.
You and your husband decided to talk to Jessica about potentially having her go to the hospital, true?
Correct.
Your husband returned home from the hospital on the morning of October 10th, true?
Correct.
By your personal observation, your husband was coughing and physically expressing symptoms of COVID that day after returning home, true?
Could you repeat that?
Sure. By your own personal observation that morning, your husband was coughing and physically expressing symptoms of COVID that day after returning home.
I don't know.
Ma'am, I would like to reference your transcript once again, if we could, on page 107. If you could just tell me when you get to page 107.
I'm there. I'm there.
Okay, thank you. I want to reference line 17. There's a question there that says as follows. Okay, he was coughing and experiencing symptoms of COVID as of the 10th. Answer, that's correct. Did I read that correctly?
Correct. I just didn't remember.
Thank you. When your husband arrived home on the morning of October 10th, he told you that he felt as if he had gotten COVID, true?
True.
Your husband was subsequently hospitalized himself as a result of COVID symptoms on or about October 14th of 2021, true?
Could you repeat that?
Your husband was subsequently hospitalized himself as a result of COVID symptoms on or about October 14th of 2021, true?
I was wrong on that date. It was like 3 days after Grace died.
Okay, so when you testified your deposition the 14th, you were incorrect on that day when you...
Correct. I made a mistake. I thought
Okay.
it was the 14th.
Your husband was subsequently hospitalized as a result of COVID, true?
Correct. It wasn't the 14th though.
When your husband got home on the morning of October 10th, 2021, he informed you that one of the reasons he had been given for why he was asked to leave the hospital was that he had been shutting off alarms in Grace's room, true?
Could you repeat that slower, please?
Sure. When your husband got home on the morning of October 10th, he informed you that one of the reasons that he had been given for why he was asked to leave the hospital is that he had been shutting off the alarms in Grace's room, true?
Silencing them, not shutting them off.
Okay. Your answer is no?
I said I believe he was silencing them. I don't think the word was shut off, but I didn't. That's what
And he told you when he got home that morning that one of the reasons he was given for being asked to leave is because he was silencing alarms.
I don't remember. I'm sorry. I don't
Okay.
remember.
If you could look up in the transcript to page 109. Okay. I want to start right at the top of the page on line number 1. The question is as follows. After he got home, did he communicate to you any further in terms of why he had been asked to leave the hospital? The answer you gave was, other than challenging, I think they had mentioned, or he mentioned, that they were accusing him of shutting off alarms. Did I read that correctly?
Correct. It was accusing. Yep.
When your husband
You
left,
stated he was shutting them off, and here it stated that he was accused of that.
Ma'am, when your husband left the hospital on the morning of October 10th, a virtual visitation plan was set up with the hospital whereby care staff at the hospital could keep you apprised of Grace's progress and condition throughout the day on October 10th. True?
Talking really fast. Can you just slow down a bit?
Sure. When your husband left the hospital on the morning of October 10th, a virtual visitation plan was set up with the hospital whereby care staff at the hospital could keep you apprised of Grace's progress and condition throughout the day on October 10th.
Correct.
Okay. You and your husband did in fact receive 3 update contacts over FaceTime throughout the day on October 10th from one of Grace's nurses. True?
Correct.
You noted that Grace was eating and that she looked good to you during these FaceTime calls on October 10th, true?
Correct.
You were able to communicate with Grace's hospital caregivers through FaceTime on an iPad, true?
Grace's iPad. True, Grace's iPad.
You had no questions that day, October 10th, for Grace's caregivers, true?
I asked them how she was doing during those calls, and they just told me she was doing good.
Okay. And you stated at your deposition that you had no questions for them, true?
Not serious questions, no. Just
Okay.
how she was doing.
You did not recall experiencing any problems communicating with the hospital staff over FaceTime on October 10th, true?
True.
Your older daughter, Jessica, as I understand it, was subsequently able to enter the hospital and go to Grace's room the following day on October 11th, true?
Could you say that again, please?
Sure. Your older daughter, Jessica, was subsequently able to get into the hospital to go to Grace's room the following day, which was October 11th, true?
I believe that's true.
Okay. After Jessica gained entrance to Grace's room at the hospital, you were then able to communicate freely with Jessica by phone while she was at Grace's bedside, true?
True.
Okay. Dr. Gavin Schokar was one of Grace's doctors on October 12th and October 13th, and you testified he contacted you and your husband on October 12th seeking what you interpreted as a pre-authorization for the use of a ventilator, true?
True.
Dr. Schokar wanted an authorization to place Grace on a ventilator if something happened in the middle of the night when you and your husband could not be reached immediately.
I'm sorry, you can do, you're slow. I need you to slow down. Your words are just coming at so fast.
As I understand your testimony, you said that Dr. Schokar wanted an authorization to place Grace on a ventilator if something happened in the middle of the night when you and your husband could not be reached immediately.
Right, again, a pre-authorization.
You and your husband did not grant any authorization to place Grace on a ventilator at any time on October 12th, true?
Correct.
Okay. In fact, you denied every request from any caregiver for permission to authorize a ventilator for Grace while she was in the hospital, true?
Objection. The state's testimony.
Overruled. Cross-examination. Go ahead.
What was the question?
Okay. In fact, you denied every request from any caregiver for permission to authorize a ventilator for Grace while she was in the hospital, true?
A pre-authorization, true.
Okay. At no time did you authorize her to be placed on a ventilator at any time while she was in the hospital, true?
True, there was no need
Okay.
ever proposed.
Even on October 13th, the date of Grace's passing, neither you or your husband wanted Grace to be placed on a ventilator, true?
Same objection.
Repeat that.
Even on October 13th, the date of Grace's passing, neither you or your husband wanted Grace to be placed on a ventilator, true?
As I stated, there was no instance or situation, so we were not giving a pre-authorization.
Ma'am, the question was, even on October 13th, the date of Grace's passing, neither you or your husband wanted Grace to be placed on a ventilator, true?
And I'm saying again, there was, the way that's worded, it's sounding as if there was a situation where she would have been placed, and we were never told that there was a situation.
Okay. Ma'am, if you could refer to page 141 of your transcript. Let me know when you get there.
I'm there.
Okay. Starting at line 1, it says question, and I assume based upon your previous answers that you did not give him pre-authorization on the 13th either for the use of the ventilator. Your answer was correct. The following question was, okay, did it continue to be the case that you did not believe that she needed to be on the ventilator? Your answer to that question was correct. Did I read that correctly?
Correct. We were never
Okay.
told that the situation was at hand.
Ma'am, on October 13th,
Objection?
ma'am, by October 13th,
Objection on what basis?
Completeness?
You can redirect on that.
Thank you, Judge.
Go ahead.
by October 13th of 2021, a decision had already been made by you and your husband that under no circumstances would you permit Grace to be placed on a ventilator in the hospital, true?
Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. By October 13th of
Just
20.
do something, so can you just close the transcript, because it looked like you were reading it as he was asking you the question.
Because I'm trying to follow along, because
But he's not asking from there anymore, so if you can just have her close it when you're done with it,
Okay,
as then she can focus on your question and we don't have to repeat them.
absolutely, absolutely. I'm not asking any questions about the transcript. This is a new question, okay?
Okay.
All right. By October 13th of 2021, a decision had already been made by you and your husband that under no circumstances would you permit Grace to be placed on a ventilator in the hospital, true?
No, I guess I'm confused on what you're saying there.
Okay, well, can you reference page 148 of your transcript,
I
please?
thought you weren't in the transcripts any longer.
I now am. I've asked the question and I just want to reference that particular page, page 148.
I'm there.
Okay, I'm referencing page or line 10. There's a question starting on line 10, and that question is as follows. And the decision had already been made that under no circumstances would she be intubated or put on a ventilator, even if she were to have some sort of arrest or stop breathing. Your answer was correct. Did I read that correctly?
You did.
Okay.
Action rule of completeness. On redirect.
You'll be able to do redirect. If you're done, just tell her that you're done with it so she can close it.
May close the transcript. Okay. Ma'am, after Grace's death, your husband commenced a GoFundMe campaign to raise money, true?
Objection vague, relevance.
Cross-examination, go ahead.
Could you state that again, please?
Sure.
What date you said?
After Grace's death, your husband commenced a GoFundMe campaign to raise money, true?
True.
Your husband also started a website for Grace after her passing.
True.
Shortly after the GoFundMe account was started, your husband also opened a second fundraising campaign premised upon Grace's death on Give, Send, Go, true?
True.
The purpose behind the Give, Send, Go fundraising campaign was to encourage giving to Grace's cause, true?
True.
Grace's cause was to help others to know what was happening in hospitals during the COVID pandemic, true?
True.
You and your husband believed that protocols were being followed by hospitals during the COVID pandemic that did not heal people, but instead ended people's lives, true?
True.
One of these protocols about which you were trying to get the word out was the use of ventilators in hospitals for the treatment of COVID patients, true?
True.
This was a protocol that was followed by hospitals during the COVID pandemic that you and your husband believe was not helping patients live, true?
Could you repeat the question?
This was a protocol, the use of ventilators, that was followed by hospitals during the COVID pandemic that you and your husband believe was not helping patients live, true?
True.
One of the things you and your husband were raising money for was to get the word out about those protocols being followed by hospitals, like the use of ventilators, true?
Repeat it one more time. Slower, please.
One of the things you and your husband were raising money for was to get the word out about such protocols being followed by hospitals, like the use of ventilators, true?
Not sure. I don't know for sure what the total reason was.
Okay. Ma'am, you and your husband found information and statistics that led you to believe that ventilators were killing people, true?
Repeat that, please.
You and your husband found information and statistics that led you to believe that ventilators were killing people, true?
Correct.
You found this information and statistics on what you describe as alternative media sources, specifically Substack and Rumble, true?
Objection, relevance, hearsay, multiple hearsay.
Ruled on relevance, and that was already dealt with on a pretrial motion. Not sure what hearsay.
He's going, I believe, is going to ask about some other internet something, which would be asking her to talk about some hearsay that's out there.
I think the question had to do with the impact it's going to have on her. That's how it's relevant, because she had listened to stuff and her husband believe stuff. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, I'm just asking where she found this, or trying to find out where she found this.
So again, you go back to hearsay, members of the jury, and I will allow it if it's intended to show the impact on in this case, Ms. Schara. So the objection's overruled on hearsay as well.
To the relevance as to the timing, this was years after her daughter was in the hospital. The impact on her, the relevance of the impact on her in 2014 or 20.
Yeah, I think that was
2024.
dealt with in a pretrial, but we can take it up after the jury leaves today.
Thank you, Judge.
Sure, go ahead.
This information and statistics on what you describe as alternative media sources, specifically Substack and Rumble, true?
True.
In conducting research on these hospital protocols involving ventilators, you and your husband deliberately avoided consulting any mainstream media sources which you considered to be untruthful, true?
Repeat the question, please.
In conducting research on these hospital protocols involving ventilators, you and your husband deliberately avoided consulting any mainstream media sources which you considered to be untruthful, true?
I don't know.
Okay.
You're stating deliberately. I don't think we deliberately did that.
If you could reference page 196 of your transcript, please. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
Okay, starting at line 20 on page 196, there's a question that says, when you say truth source, what do you mean by truth source? Your answer was a source where you can actually get the truth, the news that's truthful. My next question was, okay, is or are there any sources that you know to be untruthful and that you would definitely avoid so as to avoid untruthful news? Your answer was all of the regular news stations. My answer or my interjection was, oh, and your completion of your answer was, they're not reporting the truth. My next question was like CNN, ABC, NBC, the big ones like that. Your answer was, yeah, right. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. So the mainstream media sources you and your husband avoided, including the likes of media sources like CNN, ABC, NBC, the big ones like that. True?
Repeat the question, please.
The mainstream media sources that you and your husband avoided, including media sources like CNN, ABC, NBC, the big ones like that. True?
True.
Okay. You avoided these mainstream sources of information because you and your husband believed they were not truthful about what was going on in hospitals during the COVID pandemic. True?
True.
Okay. In December of 2023, you gave an interview on something called the Mothers for Justice bus tour. True?
True.
Okay. You were interviewed at that time with another woman named Rebecca, who had a website that she maintained entitled deathbyhospitalprotocol.com, true?
True.
Rebecca talked to you about that website when you met her during that interview in December of 2023, true?
Objection, hearsay.
Just tell me what the question was again.
Yeah, the question was simply whether or not Rebecca,
Read it back.
yeah, whether Rebecca talked to you about the
Let me just have
website.
the court reporter read it back. That way we see if she's actually doing this right. Objection overruled. Go ahead and answer.
The question was what?
Did Rebecca talk to you?
Oh, yes, true.
You understood that this website, deathbyhospitalprotocol.com, constituted an attempt to put the names and faces of healthcare providers on a website so that they could be portrayed as murderers to let everyone know that's what they do, true?
Objection, and Judge, I'd like to be heard either outside the presence of the jury or to refer to a prior motion and ruling.
Counsel may approach. What we're going to do is just
All rise.
Okay, thank you.
All right, everyone may be seated, and counsel, you can go back to your table, and we'll just talk. So I think what you referenced in the sidebar, and then you guys weren't able to hear me, and I was hesitant to speak up louder, was, Mr. Boylan, you said that Dr. Shokar's motion in limiting, I think you referenced number 22, was stipulated to that there was going to be no mention of murder or anything like that. That's what your basis was that you said at the sidebar?
Yes, Judge, and by anybody, because
Yeah, no,
together,
we'll argue in just a minute. And then my response was, well, in fairness, I kind of thought that their motion was to prohibit plaintiffs from doing that. And you said at the beginning of that hearing, there was an agreement, and I think you're probably right about that. By one side, it would mean neither side would do it. And that was kind of the extent of our sidebar. Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so go ahead and argue what you want to argue.
And also, they are now asking in the plaintiff's first witness to talk about this. So even if it did only apply to the plaintiff, they're asking the plaintiff's first witness to talk about this. But I do think it applies to everybody. I thought in fairness, it would apply to everybody.
Okay, and Mr. Koliak.
Discussing this, and I had indicated that I had not made that motion, and that I did intend to cross-examine the plaintiff with regard to things like beliefs and things of that nature. And I believe it was decided at that time that I would be allowed to do so, that it's not, that the decision on any other motion in limine brought by any other person would not preclude me from doing that. That was my understanding of the holding on that motion. Because I remember actually bringing it up and saying I did want to cross-examine on things like that.
Okay, Mr. Guzzi.
Andy, one of the bailiffs should be here.
Maybe
I
Kevin.
missed the exact question, but since this is my motion, I think motion in limine. Motion in limine refers to reference, argument, or suggestion that the defendant's murdered, killed, or in any way intended to cause harm to Grace Schara. Now, maybe I didn't hear the question right, but I thought it was directed in a more global sense about theories of hospitals' protocols in general, not with regard to safety, but it may not have heard the question exactly right.
I'm trying to understand what you're getting at with this whole line of question, that she was on some website
Yep.
or part of some group
I think
that was advocating and publicizing medical personnel that had murdered patients. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
You understood this website was constituted an attempt to put names and faces of healthcare providers on a website so she could portray them as murderers and let everyone know what they're doing. Now, one of the follow-ups, and it will come up with other witnesses, is that one of the witnesses, I believe it was Jessica, did place the name and face of Nurse McGinnis and Dr. Shokar on that website. So, I mean, that's what the series of questions is working toward, is bringing that out.
Tell me the relevance of all of that in this case.
Well, the relevance is that it goes to where the plaintiff is coming from with the allegations in this case, that they believe that there was some part of some larger conspiracy.
Okay, Attorney Boylan, your response?
In terms of the hospital's argument that that's not its motion, the motion by Dr. Shokar number 22 wasn't its motion. The hospital did not oppose the motion and say, we oppose this motion because we want to bring in this information and we should be able to bring in this information. Number one, so it should bind the hospital. It was a stipulation, it was a granted motion. And in addition, in terms of Dr. Shokar's position that, well, this isn't about talking about murdering Grace, it's talking about murdering somebody else, well, then it doesn't have any relevance here at all. It's so, but I did not believe we would be here at trial talking about using the words murder, killed, and I believe that was resolved by Dr. Shokar motion number 22. If it's about somebody else, it's not relevant.
Your Honor, if it will move things along in this case, I only had a couple of questions on this topic. I can forego those questions to eliminate this issue for this witness.
Are you going to then bring it up with Ms. Vanderheiden?
Yes, I had planned to do it with the individual who actually did put those names out there, which was Jessica.
And the relevance of that, since she's not a party, is what?
Well, the relevance is that the family has testified that they share the same belief, or they're coming from the same position.
Okay, well, so you want to move on and not address it with this witness?
I can forego that question to that series of questions with this
So
one.
we can bring the jury back in, so.
Judge, may I? Because
We can always argue about it later.
not about this issue, but what is coming next also will be irrelevant. And I just want to be, the jury come in, out, in, out. I think whatever is coming next from this podcast he's asking her about is all going to be irrelevant.
I'm sorry, I'm misunderstanding what the question is. I didn't hear the objection.
Podcast is going to be irrelevant, is what I heard you say.
Yes, Your Honor.
I don't believe that's to be the case. I asked questions. I'm not referencing a podcast, a transcript, or a podcast itself. I asked questions based upon things I learned by reading sources, and she answered those questions at the deposition. I believe that's proper. It's as if I took notes after watching a news story.
Bill, can we just keep the door closed? You stay in here, and then when we're ready, go.
For example, if I watch a podcast and I obtain information, I can ask a witness about what's on that podcast if they were giving an interview of some sort. There's no problem with that. If they answer the question at a discovery deposition, I can then ask them what they said to me at the
As
deposition.
long as it's relevant.
There's going to be no relevance.
I have no idea what you guys are talking about. I mean, that's the truth. Like, I have no idea what the substance is.
There will be testimony about an interview that was given by this witness at a thing called the Mothers for Justice bus tour, which we've just brought up.
That before.
Right, and it will have statements that she made, for example, beliefs that she has about things like COVID, whether she believes in COVID, whether she considers the vaccine a vaccine bioweapon, things of that nature. That those were things that were said in that transcript. That
I'm going to allow that. May bring the jury back in.
Can I clarify something?
All right, everyone may be seated. Thanks, members of the jury, for understanding that. And there are times where, Bill, that we're just going to have to do things like that. And that was the first of them in this case. Attorney Frankowiak, you were still doing cross-examination.
Yes. Continue. Ma'am, we've discussed your deposition that you gave back in May of 2024. You testified at your deposition that what we were calling COVID during the COVID pandemic was not really COVID, did you not?
Correct.
Okay. You told me at your deposition that COVID was just our colds, so people were not dying at home from COVID, true?
True.
You told me at your deposition that COVID was really nothing more than simple colds and flus and was simply being deemed something more than that, true?
True.
Okay. You told me at your deposition, for example, that some interventions that were put in place in an attempt to slow the spread of COVID, such as masking and social distancing, were nothing more than fear tactics aimed at deliberately causing fear in the populace, true?
True.
You told me at your deposition that God made our bodies so we don't need to wear masks and that our bodies will heal themselves, true?
True.
You told me at your deposition that you believe that these COVID deaths that occurred in hospitals during the pandemic were actually caused by the hospitals, and those individuals who died with COVID symptoms in hospitals would have survived if they had just stayed home and taken supplements in order to get better, true?
Are you reading right out of the deposition? Because I don't recall exactly how I said that.
Okay.
Reading.
Sir, that we can reference page 280 of your deposition. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
Okay, on page 280, starting at line number 9, there's a question that begins as follows. That, to me, sounded like that overall, you believe that people who contracted COVID were better off staying at home than going to the hospital. Your answer was as follows. Yes, I believe that's true. I believe that what happened to them in the hospital caused their demise versus if they would have stayed at home and tried to get themselves well using different supplements and different meds at home, would have survived. I think that's obvious. Did I read that correctly?
Correct. That's what I said in deposition, not what you stated in the question.
Okay. Ma'am, your daughter Grace was never vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus, true?
Correct.
You have referred to the COVID vaccine as a bioweapon, have you not?
Correct.
Okay. You referenced the COVID vaccine as something that was used to kill people, true?
Objection. Last discussion.
Overruled. Go ahead and answer.
Repeat the question, please.
Sure. You referenced the COVID vaccine as something that was used to kill people, true?
True.
You believe that the COVID vaccine is a bioweapon aimed at causing children to die of myocarditis, true?
True.
You told me at your deposition that you believe this vaccine or bioweapon is being used deliberately to sterilize the population, true?
True.
You believe that young men who have gotten the vaccine are no longer able to father children, true?
True.
You believe that women who have gotten the vaccine are miscarrying as a result of the vaccine, true?
True.
You referred me at your deposition to a website for the Children's Health Defense, which you believe showed how many children have died as a result of vaccines, true?
True.
Okay. During your interview on the Mothers for Justice bus tour, you illustrated your belief about what the government was doing with the vaccine bioweapon by recounting a story of a specific example of blood testing that you personally observed involving a woman by the name of Rosanna Fiorazo, true?
No, it was not a Mothers for Justice bus tour.
Okay. Have you ever illustrated your belief about what the government was doing with vaccines by recounting a story of a specific example of blood testing you personally observed involving a woman by the name of Rosanna Fiorazo?
Could you slow down and repeat it, please?
Sure. Have you ever illustrated your belief about what the government was doing with the vaccine bioweapon by recounting a story of a specific example of blood testing that you personally observed involving a woman by the name of Rosanne Fiorazo?
Yes.
You told me at your deposition about this personal experience that you had with Rosanna Fiorazo, true?
True.
You and your husband know Rosanna Fiorazo's husband, David, true?
True.
In fact, you and your husband authored a chapter in a book written by Mr. David Fiorazo, true?
True.
The name of that book is Assault on the Image of God, Understanding and Responding to Attacks on the Bible, Human Life, and the Church, true?
True.
Rosanna was a Wisconsin woman who received the COVID vaccine in order to be permitted to fly to visit some family in Canada, true?
True.
You recounted to me at your deposition that Rosanna was experiencing some memory problems, so her husband requested that you accompany her to have her blood tested at a place that does blood reading, true?
True.
You personally accompanied Rosanna to this place that did blood reading and which was not a hospital, true?
True.
Okay. You sat with Rosanna while the technician who did the blood reading put the results up on a TV screen for you and Rosanna to see as she read the blood, true?
True.
You told me at your deposition what you saw on the screen at that blood reading, true?
True.
You told me that you saw nanotechnology in Rosanna's blood, things that looked like little spaceships with antennae in the blood, true?
The shapes of them looked like that. They weren't
Okay.
spaceships.
You told me that you also saw graphene and pieces of metal in her blood on that TV screen, true?
True.
Graphene is in fact a metal, true?
True.
The lady who performed this blood reading said that this was graphene in the blood that you were seeing on that screen, true?
True.
You believe that this nanotechnology and this graphene that you were seeing in Rosanna's blood was placed there as part of the COVID vaccine bioweapon that she had received, true?
True.
You told me at your deposition that you were concerned enough by what you had seen at this blood reading place to have your own blood tested, even though you had never received the vaccine, true?
True.
You got the results of this blood testing back on your own blood, and you learned that you did not have any nanotechnology in your blood, but you did have some evidence of graphene in the blood, true?
Correct.
You understood that you supposedly had graphene in your blood as a result of what you described as a phenomenon called shedding, true?
True.
You described the term shedding as describing a phenomenon whereby anyone who received the COVID vaccine for a number of days after receiving the vaccine could shed graphene into the blood of anyone who happened to be standing near that person, for example, through sweat. True?
Objection, Your Honor, at this point, how long this has gone on, I also believe this is subject to prior rulings.
Go ahead and answer about the question about the sweat and getting in from others.
I'm not sure if that's how it was stated in my depositions. That sounds much more different than what I
Okay.
described.
If you could reference page 245 of your transcript.
Okay.
Starting at page 1, the question was posed. So shedding, what do you mean by shedding? And your answer was as follows. When people were standing next to each other, I don't know the technological stuff, but if you were within somebody within so many days of them getting the vaccination, the body was, through their sweat, was able to pass some of this, like I said, I don't know the exact description. CHD has a description of it. Did I read that correctly?
That's what's written here, yes. That's what's written here.
I'm sorry?
That is what's written in the deposition.
Thank you. You can close the transcript. I don't have any further questions there. CHD is the Children's Health Defense website?
Correct.
Okay. You believe that you must have been standing in close proximity to someone who had received the vaccine at some point, such that some graphene was shed from that person's blood to your own?
As I said in my thing, I don't know how it works. I don't know how the graphene, but it's through the.
You told me at your deposition that there were certain ways to detox, i.e. to get the graphene out of your blood. True?
True.
You mentioned to me at your deposition that you can detox from the graphene shed by those who had received the vaccine by drinking dandelion root tea or by taking baths using certain items. True?
Just repeat that again.
Yes. You mentioned to me at your deposition that you can detox from the graphene shed by those who had received the vaccine by drinking dandelion root tea or by taking baths using certain items. True?
True.
Okay. At your deposition, I asked if you could kindly identify for me the name and location of the place where you went to have your blood tested. And you told me in your deposition that you could identify the place, but you would not do so. True?
I wouldn't because you were badgering me.
Okay.
Mocking me.
Ma'am, prior to October of 2021, you were the one who was most involved with providing for Grace's needs on a day-to-day basis. Would that be a fair statement?
Say that again.
Prior to October of 2021, you would have been the one most involved in providing for Grace's needs on a day-to-day basis. True?
Correct.
Okay. That was because your husband had a job outside of the home, but you were able to homeschool Grace and spent the most time with her on a day-to-day basis. True?
True. She was my student.
Okay. That's all I have for you, ma'am. Thank you.
Attorney Guzzi, cross-examination.
Thank you, Judge. Are you able to hear me okay?
I am.
All right. You testified in your, you testified earlier that Dr. Shokar didn't inform you as to Grace being in the ICU.
That he did not inform me?
Did not inform you.
Correct. Correct.
You also testified that Grace never changed rooms while she was in St. Elizabeth, correct?
Correct.
So your husband, Scott, was in that same room from October 7th through the 10th, true?
Correct.
And your daughter, Jessica, was in that room several times during Grace's hospitalization.
Correct.
Certainly, they told you that she was in the ICU.
No. No.
They never told you that.
No,
You also testified that you're qualified in CPR.
I take CPR to keep myself,
I'm sorry, were you finished?
you just asked me if I take CPR, correct?
Asked if you testified that you're qualified in CPR.
I have been, yes, meaning I take the classes,
So you know the purpose of CPR,
correct?
and you know how it works, right?
If I would come upon somebody, yes, I would know,
You know that you have to do chest compressions, right?
correct,
And that you'd be working on the patient to try to revive them,
correct,
right?
correct.
So when you had your conversation with Dr. Shokar, both on October 12th and October 13th, I think you told us that Dr. Shokar was asking you if there was a scenario in which Grace experienced cardiac arrest, would you want them to keep working on her? You recall that?
He didn't say cardiac arrest.
He did say heart stops though, didn't he?
He said if her heart stopped and we couldn't get it going again, would you want us to keep working on her?
So he may not have said cardiac arrest, but he did say heart stops, right?
Yes,
And with your qualifications in CPR, you know that those are the same thing, don't you?
yes,
When he was, you knew exactly what he was talking about, and he was talking about CPR.
it was an odd situation. He just talked to us about putting her on, getting her food and stuff. So it was
Being non-responsive.
correct. What'd you say?
Ruled. It was non-responsive, they heard it, but keep going.
Can you knew that, right?
I didn't think of it in that way at that time, at that moment. We were just talking about Grace getting on a feeding tube and everything.
But you were thinking in your mind something along the lines of, if she's already gone, it's futile. That's what you were thinking, right?
Yes,
Did you tell Dr. Shokar that?
no,
At some point during either the conversation of the 12th or the 13th, you and Dr. Shokar, Mr. Schara and Dr. Shokar discussed a tracheotomy.
we did not discuss a tracheotomy.
Okay, in the context of the conversation, Dr. Shokar brought it up.
He mentioned those who get a ventilator most of the time get a trach.
Do you have an understanding of what tracheotomy is?
Yes, I'm actually advocating for a lady that has a trach right now.
And so you know that a trach, that's an incision directly into the windpipe and the tube goes down, right?
Correct.
You understand it's a surgical procedure.
Correct.
You understand that it's done under general anesthesia, right?
Not always,
Local anesthesia.
not in an emergency.
Sure, that would be called a slash trach, right?
I believe so.
That's not what we're talking about in this case. That's not.
He just mentioned the trach and the way that he said, most people that get a ventilator get a trach. That's all he said, was not a discussion.
And you also knew that that procedure leaves a permanent scar.
Yes,